Well, I have some good news for you today. Today, I'm going to leave off my commentary on marriage and relationships and society and all the rest of that and get back to our text where we left off, particularly in verse 3, where Paul previously had said to us, "Your beauty should not come from outward adorning, but rather it should be of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in the sight of God." Like so many things, I think that it's important that we define our words. We live in a culture that no longer defines words or redefines them in ways that are convenient at any moment in time. And so it's interesting because from a etymological point of view, that language changes and grows as people adapt for certain words and terminology or create whole new terms to describe something that hadn't been part of the culture before. For example, the word computer. It surprises people oftentimes that if you go into other cultures, whether you go to India or Russia or Germany, it doesn't matter because the same word is used to describe the same thing. The computer is the word that was coined in the United States to describe this digital mechanism that you and I are using right now. And so we have this common understanding. But when you come to a word beauty, you find that it's in the eye of the beholder, someone said. And in fact, there's such a truth to that because what you may consider to be beauty, someone else may not consider to be beauty. All you have to do is look at photographs of fashion models from the last 100 years, and you'll find the concept of beauty is vastly different over the years. I remember first time I went to India, I was looking at an Indian newspaper, and this was before they had been really exposed to the Western fashions. And I'm opening up, and there's this full-page ad for what they call men's suitings. In other words, clothes for men. And they showed a man wearing the traditional Indian garb, but basically he was really, really portly. I mean, he had a big belly. And I discovered that in countries where hunger is a common plague, people who can afford to eat a lot because they can afford to eat a lot. And that had become a sign of prosperity and beauty. And that, in fact, when I was in Egypt, first time I went there and I was speaking at various churches and conferences there for about 3 weeks. I was having dinner one time and they kept on feeding me, bringing more and more food. And I couldn't eat anymore. I said, I'm sorry, I can't eat any more food. And one of the pastors was there saying, "How can you be a pastor and be so thin?" Now, keep in mind, this was some years ago, so I was much thinner than I am today. And I thought, what a strange question. How can I be a pastor and be so thin? But for him, if you were a pastor, everybody wanted you to come to their house and eat, and you ate as much as you could because food was a luxury that was not something available to everybody. And so here again, the sign of their importance and their stature was their waistline. And not the smallness of it, but the broadness of it. We live in a culture where there is so much excess that we've decided really that to go the other direction, the more fit and vigorous you can be, the more attractive you can be to the other source. In fact, we've gone so far that we run feverishly away from an unavoidable reality, and that's called aging. Even to the point where we're spending tremendous amount of money on technology trying to not only reduce our waistline, but even to implant and inject and suck away and do all these kinds of things, if nothing else, just to paint up and cover up what are the realities of the aging process. And we no longer look at people with aged lines and gray hair and think to ourselves, this is a notable thing. Because we also have adapted the idea that young people are smarter than older people, and therefore we should listen to the young and not the old. The reality is that unless we begin to experience senility, which is part of the process for all of us to one degree or another, age brings wisdom, and youth brings impulsiveness, so that we have the energy when we're young to leap into before we take a real good look at what we're doing. And that's where we often need to depend on the counsels of the elders. So in some ways, I'm heartened because I see with a lot of the younger people that they're beginning to gravitate back towards this idea that older people, my parents in particular, have lived longer and experienced more. They know the pitfalls. And if I listen to them, then I probably will turn out better for me than not. Now, I have to admit, some parents haven't learned anything. They're still operating like children. And if you're in that situation, I'm sorry and I apologize. But for me, because my parents weren't saved, they had a lot of good worldly wisdom to impart to me. But some of it was not so good. For example, my dad said that you never apologize and you never say you're sorry. You never admit you're wrong, which I find was, even as a young man, I thought, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like that works. And then I became a Christian. I started reading the Bible, and the Bible said, confess your sins and humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he who is the servant of others will be the greatest in God's kingdom. And I found that there was a whole paradigm that I needed to shift to that was completely different than many of these concepts that I had been taught as a young person. And I found that it served me much better. So, I know a lot of us like to feel like we're strong and in charge, but even at our strongest moments, we aren't really strong enough or in charge enough that ultimately God is strong and he's in charge. And the more we depend upon him, the more it'll work out well for us. But even when we talk about something like beauty, when he says your beauty should not come from outward adornment, he is not criticizing people for wearing jewelry or even wearing makeup or brushing your hair or having a flattering haircut or wearing attractive garments that look good on you and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. He says, don't let that be what you rely upon exclusively. But rather, he said, let it be this thing that's on the inside of you, that inner beauty. In fact, the word beauty, by very definition, literally means something that is commonly described of an object that makes it pleasurable to look at. Makes it pleasurable to look at. Now, immediately we think about physical beauty. And I think that there are people who have, exceptional levels or degrees of physical beauty. They were born and the lottery of life made them physically perfect or attractive or whatever. There are other people who are physically attractive because they worked very, very hard and do everything they can to enhance that. But the whole idea is that we find that beauty is something that's not limited to our cultural experiences. That across the world, when you put up pictures of people and they ask people to pick out the people that they think are the most beautiful, they pretty much make the same choices. There's a real commonality in our perception of beauty. But one of the things that Proverbs warns us about is that someone can be incredibly beautiful on the outside and incredibly ugly on the inside. And that's the sad thing that I see, that there are many people who use their beauty as a ploy to deceive other people. That's why even at the end of Proverbs, Solomon talking about women, he says that beauty is deceitful and charm is deceptive. That beauty and charm can often allure us into accepting or embracing something that isn't real. And so there are people who have become experts at faking charm. They come across, they know how to smile and, how you doing? You're like, I love you. But push come to shove, they're going to push and shove you off the cliff if it means that they can advance themselves or protect themselves. And so I think these are things that, we have to take the time to kind of negotiate in our own mind. And particularly as we age or if we're not built in what this current moment in history defines as beautiful, because that always changes. If we're not fitting into the perfect definition of what beauty is in our culture, we need to be careful that we don't buy into the false narrative. And instead we buy into God's narrative. God's narrative is this: the most important part of your beauty features is what's on the inside of you. That you'll find that most people are attracted to other people who they find beautiful on the inside. They feel that love, they feel that genuineness, they feel that care, they feel that concern, that compassion. When people perceive that in us, that we are caring and compassionate and concerned for their welfare, they're going to be attracted to us. And attraction doesn't have to depend upon a physical appearance. It means basically that I feel loved by that person. And so I particularly encourage young people who are struggling with fitting into the profile of the current moment. And that's the thing that strikes me is I see young people all try to fit into the same little square box of what the culture says is beauty. And not everybody's going to fit into that box. And even if you do, you can't keep it. It's fleeting. It passes away. You're going to get older. And you're going to find that, I thought it's so amazing, even with something like this plastic surgery, I found out that you have to every 10 years go back and have a repair job. It has to be redone, to the point where you see some of these older actresses who look like, Mr. Plastic Face. And it's just like, that's more unattractive than if they had just aged. So I think it's important for us to understand that there's a narrative that wants to get us to neglect the development of who we are on the inside and invest ourselves on trying to become something only on the outside. Well, we'll continue in verse 4 tomorrow. Thank you.